Okay, so hello everyone. I need you energized with me because this is the first talk and it's early in the morning. So I hope you're all focused, okay? So stay with me. Today I'm going to talk about Aikido, turning EDRs to malicious wipers using zero-day exploits. So basically how I managed to turn EDRs really to malicious wipers. My name is Yair, as mentioned. So this is me. I'm a security researcher at SafeBridge. I'm 23 years old. I'm already about 5 years in the cybersecurity industry. Started my way in the IDF, did some Linux and embedded research and some Android research for a certain period as well. And for over 2 years, I've been doing a lot of Windows internals research in SafeBridge, which I just really enjoy doing. So let's see what we are going to talk about today. So we're going to start with me talking about the initial research goal that I had in mind when I started the research. Then we'll talk a bit about wipers in general, see what are wipers, see what they are used for, and how do they work. Then we'll deep dive into the technical aspects of the research process itself to see how I managed to find the zero-day vulnerabilities that allowed the creation of Aikido Wiper. Okay, so let's begin. The initial research goal that I had in mind when I started this is that I wanted to create some sort of a next-generation wiper. I wanted to take wipers to the next level. But in order to take something to the next level, one must first understand the current generation. So let's talk a bit about wipers in general first. The first thing you do when you want to get the definition of something is that you go to Wikipedia and you look it up. And when I searched wiper in Wikipedia, I just saw that a wiper is a device used to remove rain, snow, ice, washer fluid, water, or even debris from a vehicle's front window. But that is not the wiper that we are going to talk about, of course, today. But we are going to talk about the wiper malware. And again, according to Wikipedia, in computer security, a wiper is a class of malware intended to erase the hard drive of the computer it infects, maliciously deleting data and programs. Now that shouldn't be a surprise for any of you if you are attending this talk, but I just wanted to make this clear. But why are wipers even used? So it's very hard to give a specific definition for that, but overall the most accurate definition that we can give is that it is used to harm a certain entity, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a state, a certain company or organization. The purpose is to damage the target entity, and I also attached a few examples in which we can see both Russia and Ukraine, Iran and Israel were attacked by wipers, also the government-related organizations and so. So yeah, basically everything that we hear on the news about rivalry between countries is also expressed in cyber warfare. But that is not why we are here in this talk. We are here to talk about the technical aspects of wipers. So, in order to talk about that, we must first understand something very important, which is the difference between deletion and a wipe. So deletion is a word which is very much associated with the word wiping, but there is actually a crucial difference between them. So we can take a look at the default deletion process in Windows to understand that. In Windows, once a certain process calls the delete file API function, then it actually causes the kernel to go to a certain place on the hard drive, which is called the MFT. That stands for the master file table in the NTFS file system. And in this table, the kernel just marks a certain entry as free. Now, this entry is just a pointer to the actual file content. So when we delete a file, it's not actually being deleted, but just a pointer to it is marked as free. So the content is still left on the disk. And that is the difference between wiping something or deleting something. When we say that we are wiping something, it means that we are actually removing the content of the file itself in order to make it impossible to restore. But there is a way to escalate a deletion to a wipe, and that is because once MFT entries are marked as free, they may be reused again, of course, because otherwise we will be running out of disk space in no time, right? So when we create a new file, this file is given an MFT entry which was marked as free, and then when we write some new content to that new file, it basically overwrites content which was left on the disk from a deleted file. But when I tried to understand how wipers nowadays overcome that gap between a deletion and a wipe, I saw that most of them don't even delete files. Instead, they just overwrite them. So by overwriting files, wipers can make sure that they are actually replacing, and by that removing, the content of the file itself. And this technique is used by very famous wipers that we all know, some from the very recent years too, just like we can see in this slide. And mostly, wipers will require admin privileges for that because they can wipe user files, but usually they will also want to make the system unbootable, which means deleting system files. And in order to cause extra damage, they will also want to delete files that belong to an administrator. So most wipers do look for admin privileges to use this technique. Another very popular technique among wipers is the drive destruction technique. So basically that means that the wiper opens the hard drive as a device and it starts writing directly to it. By doing that, it can overwrite structures that are related to booting the system, structures that belong to the NTFS file system, and files themselves. But of course, Windows does require admin privileges in order to write to the hard drive as a device. And again, just like we can see about the last technique, this is also used among famous wipers that we all know, and some from the very recent years as well. But after I learned about these techniques, or any other technique that I read about, I had a very important insight. And that is that each one of the techniques that I learned about is obviously initiated by the process of the wiper itself. So that means that if, for example, we will run process monitor while a wiper runs with the file overwrite technique, then we will see a process that opens and writes to a lot of files. And that can be legitimate in certain occasions, but it's still extremely incriminating and obvious when we see such an unknown process that opens and writes to a lot of files. But what if this is exactly how we can take wipers to the next level? What if we can create the next generation wiper that will be able to do all that and wipe all of these files without using extremely obvious API calls? And what if this very same next generation wiper could also do all that as an unprivileged user as opposed to all the other techniques? That was when I thought about Aikido. Now, Aikido is a martial art that specializes in using the power of opponents against them. But how is that even relevant to this talk? It's relevant because EDRs have a very special superpower. They have the ability to delete almost any file on the system, no matter the required privileges, because they usually run with the highest permissions possible, because they need to have this ability, because a malicious file can appear everywhere. But before we are going to understand exactly how we can Aikido EDRs into deleting our target files as an unprivileged user, let's first understand briefly when do EDRs choose to delete or quarantine files? So, of course, it depends on the configuration, but the most default configuration that I saw was that most EDRs do choose to automatically delete or quarantine a file that they detect as surely malicious. Now, some EDRs do that when the file is open. That's the time when they detect the file. Some EDRs detect the file once it is closed after it was written to. And most EDRs do suggest an option for a custom scan of a custom path or just a general system scan. And now that we know that, we can start thinking about the process of Aikidoing the EDRs to deleting our target files. And when I started doing that, I realized that actually stage 1 in this process is completed. And that is because I understood that even as an unprivileged user, I am already able to trigger the deletion. That is because an unprivileged user is able to create a malicious file. And with the creation of a malicious file, we are actually triggering a deletion. So all that I'm really left with is that I need to trigger that very same deletion for the wrong file. And once you think about it like that, the first idea that comes up to mind is to maybe just write some malicious content to an innocent file and then wait for that file to be deleted by the EDR, of course. But that's a little bit problematic because doing that very much looks like the file override technique. It's basically the same API calls. And also, this will require write permissions to the file that we want to write to the files that we want to wipe. And so we still have the same problem that we had with the file override technique. But the second idea was a bit more relevant, and it was to maybe just somehow point the EDR towards a different path, while it still thinks that it deletes the original path. So these vulnerabilities are usually achieved using links. And the link vulnerability category, CWE59, is already very well known in our industry. It's so well known that Microsoft do know that they must have a user right for creating symbolic links, and it's given by default only to administrators. But the funny thing that I saw is that in the NTFS file system, we have 3 types of links. So we have hard links, junction points, and symbolic links. So hard links don't matter that much for this discussion, but junction points, from a high-level point of view, they work exactly the same like a local directory symlink. But the difference is that a junction point does not require any special permission to create it. So I just realized that if I want to if I want to somehow point EDRs towards a different path, I should probably use junctions to my advantage. But even knowing that I'm going to use them, I still needed to find the right window of opportunity for that, find the right time, and understand exactly how. And in order to get to that, I had to first understand the file deletion process by an EDR. So there are 2 crucial events in that process. First of all, there's the time in which the EDR detects the malicious file and decides to delete it. And then we have the second event in which the file is actually being deleted. Now, between these 2 events, I imagined a potential gap which I will maybe able to abuse using junctions to point the EDR towards a different path. So let's see what was my first idea to do that. So let's say that as an unprivileged user, we want to delete a driver. So that driver is andis.sys. And it is located inside C Windows System 32 drivers. Then what we can potentially do is to create a path which is very similar to that path that we want to delete. just with one main difference, like you can see on the right side of the slide. We created the temp directory as an unprivileged user, and then we created the exact same path inside. So we created ctemp Windows System32 drivers, and then inside we created a new ndis.sys file, and that ndis.sys file contains malicious content which the EDR wants to delete. But if right before the deletion, we will delete everything from inside the temp directory and convert it to be a junction point that points towards the C drive, then the same path that leads to the ndis.sys file that we created now actually leads to the original ndis.sys file. So the path ctemp Windows System32 drivers ndis.sys leads to the original file. So that is just exactly what I tried to do. I tried to create mimikatz in the path ctemp Windows System32 drivers ndis.sys. Then immediately after the creation, delete everything with the mimikatz file itself from the temp directory, convert the temp directory to be a junction, and wait for the real ndis.sys file to be deleted. But that actually did not work, and I saw two main behaviors. So the first one was that just some EDRs had a very good grip on the file right after I created it, so I was not even able to delete the file, and so I was not able to convert the temp directory to be a junction. And the second behavior was that some EDRs just realized that the threat is gone after I myself deleted the mimikatz file, so they just didn't try to delete an extra file after I did the whole thing with the junction. So I understood that the potential gap that I imagined probably doesn't exist, or I need to expand it somehow. And what I did was to use a technique that is called handle catching. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with handle catching or handles in general, so when we open a file in Windows, basically we get back a handle, and as long as we don't call a function that is called close handle with this handle, then it is considered open. Now, opening a file or creating a file is done with the function createFile. And one of the parameters that we need to pass for createFile is called the file sharing mode. So the file sharing mode specifies whether other processes should be able to read, write, or delete the file that we are currently creating or opening. So what I did was to just create the mimikatz file again, but this time hold the handle to it open with a file sharing mode of read only. This has allowed the processes of the EDRs to detect the file, but not to delete the file. So once they understood that, they just started to ask for a reboot, because they knew that if a reboot happens, then this will cause the handle to be free again, and they will be able to delete the file. So let's see how they implemented it. Some EDRs just use the default API in Windows for postponing a file deletion to after the next reboot. An example for an EDR that did it is the Sentinel-1 XDR. Some other EDRs just implemented this functionality on their own, meaning they kept a list somewhere of files to delete after the reboot, and then they just did it after the reboot. Now let's focus a bit more on the Windows API way of postponing a file deletion to after the next reboot. This is done using a call to the function moveFileEx and a flag that is called moveFileDelay until reboot. This flag requires administrator privileges, because if this flag is given, this function basically goes to a certain registry value that is called pending file rename operations. And to that value, the function just adds a string, which is the path to delete after the reboot. No metadata about the file, no signature, no nothing, just a string. And the funny thing, and I would say a bit ridiculous thing about EDRs using this feature for postponing a file deletion, is that pending file rename operations blindly follows junctions. And so do other self-implementations of EDRs apparently. So basically this has allowed me to create one complete process that I was able to combine the first method that I thought of with the junctions and the second method with the handle catching to, again, one complete process that has allowed me to delete almost any file that I wanted on the system. So if I, again, will take a look at the endthis.sys file example, then in order to achieve that, I needed to create the path ctemp windows system32 drivers endthis.sys. In that file, place some malicious content, then hold the handle to it with a file sharing mode of read only and force the antivirus or the EDR to postpone the deletion to after the next reboot. Then convert the temp directory to be a junction point after I deleted everything from inside. Reboot the computer and the endthis.sys file, the original one, is gone. So by doing that, we've achieved the two what-ifs that we talked about in the beginning of the talk, and I promise that any other edge case will be answered in the rest of the talk. So let's talk about the vulnerabilities. Overall, 6 vulnerabilities were found to be vulnerable to this kind of an exploit. So the products are Microsoft Defender, Defender for Endpoint, Sentinel-1 XDR, Trend Micro Apex 1, Avast Antivirus, and AVG Antivirus. 3 out of the vendors that appear here are actually in the leaders section in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Endpoint Protection Platform for the year 2022. Overall, it's 4 different vulnerabilities because the vulnerability in the Defender products are mutual in the same code. And this is true only also for the Avast and AVG products, which belong to the same vendor, which is called the Gen. So these are also the CVEs that you can see. Sentinel-1 chose to not issue a CVE. And I do have one disclaimer regarding the vulnerabilities in the Defender products, and that is that I was only able to achieve arbitrary directory deletion and not file deletion. But as you probably know, wipers do not really care about deleting a few extra files. So if the wiper wants to delete a certain file, it can just mark its parent directory for deletion, and the same result will be achieved. So now we have our first demo for this talk. In this demo, we will see an exploitation attempt with the deletion of all the drivers from the default drivers directory in Windows. So we will not see the wiper yet in action. We will have a demo for that later, but for now, we'll just see the exploitation itself. So let's take a look. So now we'll see all the drivers in the drivers directory in Windows. We can see that there are dozens. Now we are running as a user called limited, and limited belongs to the normal unprivileged users group. Now we are creating a path which is similar to the path that we want to delete. So temp Windows system32, and inside we're creating a malicious file called drivers, just like the drivers directory, and we're holding the handle to it open with a file sharing mode of read only. We are asking Defender to scan the path just to rush the process. Now let's see what Defender says. So it gives up on the deletion, asks for a reboot. It's now safe to close the handle, delete the temp directory, convert it to be a junction. So we are creating the junction instead. And now we can reboot the computer. Now let's see what happens after. Okay, so almost all the drivers are gone from the drivers directory, and that is because Defender iterated through all the drivers until it encountered a problem, which is Probably similar to the problem with the file sharing mode, so it was not able to delete them all, but it deleted dozens of drivers, and now after the next reboot, the operating system is no longer bootable. So this exploit is also applicable in order to bypass a ransomware protection feature that is called the controlled folder access feature. Basically, this feature prevents untrusted processes from modifying or deleting any file that is contained inside one of the folders that are listed in the protected folders list of this feature. But the controlled folder access feature is not going to prevent basically the most trusted entity on the system, which is the EDR or the AV, from deleting a file. Especially not if it thinks that it's malicious, it wouldn't make any sense. So this is how we can also bypass this feature using these exploits. Overall, I tested 11 different products and 6 of them were found to be vulnerable. So that is more than 50%, and not only that, I was just unable to force the other products to go into a flow of postponing the deletion to after the next reboot. So if you work for an EDR vendor, or if you are a security researcher and you want to help and verify that we don't have any more of these problematic flows, I tested as many easy EDRs that I could, but of course there's a limit. I cannot check all the EDRs in the world. So if you know such a flow of postponing file deletion to after the next reboot, please take a look at that and let's close these vulnerabilities before real attackers use them. Now to the Aikido wiper tool itself. So I implemented it with the vulnerabilities of Sentinel-1, XDR, Defender, and Defender for Endpoint, just because they were the most consistent and easiest to implement. The wiper is able to make the system unbootable, just like we saw in the first demo. It is fully undetectable because it deletes files using the most trusted entity on the system, in our case the AV or the EDR. And in order to minimize the noise of the creation of a malicious file, the wiper uses the ACOR test file instead, which is not really a malicious file, but EDRs and AVs still delete. It is able to run with the permissions of unprivileged user, just like we saw in the demo again, and we will see in the second demo. And it is even able to delete an entire administrator user directory, and that is what we will see in the second demo. But if you remember, in the beginning of the talk, I explicitly mentioned that wiping and deleting are not the same thing. So I still needed to overcome that somehow. But the solution for that was pretty simple. All that I really needed to do is that after the deletion happens and after the reboot happens, just create a huge file on the disk with random bytes, and that has overridden the data which was still left on the disk. Now, I also verified with 2 popular file recovery tools that they were able to recover some of the files before I implemented this feature, but after I added this feature, they were not able to recover any file whatsoever. The tools are CleverFiles, Disk Drill, and CCleaner Recuva. And I'm sure that you also asked yourself, but what about the quarantine directory? Because the default configuration of some EDRs is to quarantine the files if they think they are malicious. So even if I cause the EDR to quarantine some files that it didn't meant to, the user can later just go to the management UI of the EDR and restore the files, right? But that was actually a pretty simple solution too, and a little bit funny. So all that I needed to do is to exploit the vulnerabilities against the quarantine directory as well. And that has just led EDRs to the point where they need to quarantine the quarantine directory, and they just deleted that instead. So this was bypassed as well. And the repository is well documented. I try to invest as much time in it as I could, also some time in the design. So you really have my invitation to clone it, fork it, find more vulnerabilities, learn from it, and basically I'll give you a moment to scan the QR code, take a picture or something, and you can also just look up Aikido wiper in Wikipedia, in Google. You'll get it in the first result. Okay, so a few more seconds. Okay, so now we have our second demo for this talk. In this demo, we will see the wiper itself in action with an attempt of deletion of an entire administrator user directory while the Sentinel-1 XDR is running. So let's take a look. So we are logged in right now as admin. We will see that admin has a lot of files in its default libraries. So we saw that in File Explorer. We can see that this is really an admin that belongs to the administrators group. Now we are switching users to limited again. And we'll just again see that limited belongs to the normal and unprivileged users group. Now, limited runs the wiper with the mode proxy deletion of all user data of the user admin. Now, before that, we'll just see that the admin directory really exists, and that is the directory that contains all the files that we saw earlier. The tool automatically exploits the right vulnerability for the installed product, including for the quarantine directory. Then it reboots the computer, and now let's see what happened. So we can see that the admin directory is just fully gone. It was deleted by the Sentinel-1 XDR. And we can see that the disk is starting to fill with data, and that is because the wiper was run after the reboot silently in order to, as I mentioned, overcome the gap between a deletion and a wipe. Okay, so let's summarize all of that. What did we learn today? So first of all, a wiper or any other malware for that case can be much more dangerous if it uses trusted entity on the system, in our case, the EDR or the AV, to do its malicious actions by proxy, because then there is no product that will detect that. Now, I'm sure that you heard it a lot by now, but you can never say it enough. Having security controls does not necessarily mean that you are secure, so please keep validating yourself every day. Now, security controls, EDRs or AVs in our case, can be also a very preferred target for an attacker to search vulnerabilities in because they have so high privileges. And lastly, always assume that permissions can be escalated. Now, I do have some vendor responses in here from Microsoft and Gen. Overall, I have no complaints. They were very cooperative. You can take a look at their responses later. And okay, these are the versions that you want to make sure you have installed. So, of course, all of the vulnerabilities are fixed. Please note that in the train macro Apex 1 product, it's a patch and not a version, so make sure that you have this patch installed. Now, I do want to close the talk with something very important that is still a risk as we talk, and that is the pending file rename operations feature. So basically, not a lot of developers are aware of that, but each use of the function moveFileEx with that flag, moveFile delay until reboot, or just straight ahead using the pending file rename operation feature, if we are using that and we are giving this feature a path which can be partially controlled by an unprivileged user, then we are actually creating a vulnerability. And that is not very intuitive to think about, but I'm trying to raise the awareness for that. So please keep that in mind, and in the companies you work in, also try to notice this feature and be aware of its risks. I do want to thank Shmuel Cohen, which is a team member in the team that I work in, for the assistance with testing my exploits against different EDR products. And basically, this is it. We can move on to the Q&A session. You can have my Twitter, LinkedIn, and email if you want to chat later. I'll also be in the conference, so you are very welcome to approach.